think it's so important that we really encourage folks to work with people with autism because they are so in need of therapy and they benefit so much. You know, I've had some of my most rewarding work, and you're nodding, Karen. I know you've done the same thing, right? So, and you too, Mary. Yeah, everybody, we're nodding. But it's true, right? Because some of the most rewarding work is working with someone with autism when you get to the point that they trust you, because that's the thing, it takes longer. This is a cultural competency in the world of autism. They've been laughed at. Hi, Christina. They've been picked on. um, they've been bullied, and to the main issue becomes winning that trust, being a safe person, right? So when you establish, finally get that, you're deeply respecting their life experience and you're not talking to them about what they need to change, when they get that, I think you have like a significant shift. And you guys probably experienced that, right? Like people are hesitant and they're this and that. And then they finally realize you're not trying to change them. We're not talking about their behavior and what they do wrong. We're just talking about how they feel and what life is like for them. And when they finally get that, people really relax and then they start actually getting the help they need from you. And sometimes it can be so basic, like, I don't know how to talk to this person, or an instructor or an aide at my program who made jokes I don't feel comfortable with, and I don't know how to say it. And just winning that trust, then I find as a therapist, I do a lot of role playing with folks with autism because so much is around how to deal socially with people, how to have that interaction. So I have two really good videos on autism, and one I just found out about. So I had shown the Carly video and somebody you guys did, I didn't show it to you, I don't think, the Carly Fleischman, or I did on our big training, on our 6-hour training.
Yeah.
And Carly Fleischman, right? But it's controversial because, and this is really interesting. This was so interesting to me. A person who defines herself as neurodiverse, right? So she believes she's on the spectrum, said that she was so triggered by the video because they talk about that intensive ABA therapy when Carly was little. She had constant therapists working with her. And evidently this person had gone through this, who was in my training last week.
Wow.
And said it was so horrible. And she felt like the video, first of all, the video was ableist, like it used the R word. And I knew that. And, I just kind of overlook it and say, well, this is an old video, but that was offensive to her. But the big thing was the ABA was such a trigger. And she explained to me how traumatizing it was for her to go through the ABA therapy, to basically lose her childhood, to have constant therapists there flashing cards at her and rewarding her and doing this and doing that and teaching this and teaching that, while her sister got to go play.
Mm. That's real.
This pounding, the old school way, right? The old school Lovett approach, right? That the psychologist who really promoted that. And she said, I can't even look. It was so triggering, and it was ableist. So it was, okay, we won't watch that anymore. And then she said, I'll never show it again, I promise. And then she sent me this video, or she just said, look at this video. So it's called Listen. And I thought, I was going through what to do today. We have our slides, but I wanted to go more into depth with the autism. And I was thinking about what to do. And I thought, well, how cool is this video? Because it's really a heads up to our future. And I think as therapists, we're going to be, and psychologists, we're going to be working with folks who don't use words verbally, who use words. And that's another thing someone corrected me on. I get constantly corrected, but that's great. I'm learning, and it's often by people who identify as neurodiverse. that are working in the field and are, you know, I would have no idea, but they'll come up to me afterwards and say, this one thing you said, or this video you showed. So I'm learning. Okay, this was triggering and that was ableist. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't want to be ableist, you know, and so I'm learning all this. And this one person said to me, stop saying people who don't use words. And I thought it was so politically correct to say people who don't use words. That's what I've been saying about people who don't use words. And she said, no, they don't use words verbally. But they use words. They get words. So I thought that was so insightful, right? They said, I'm learning so much. The old dog is trying to
So
learn.
what does that mean?
So that means that and I'm going to show you this video. So that's my introduction to this video. And then, and so I think as therapists in the future of our work is going to be that we're going to be working with people who communicate in all different ways, you know, as the world opens up. So let me get this video up. And give me a minute here. So here's what it means, like my tricky little introduction. Oops, I'm sorry about this. I should have had it cued, but I was busy texting. Okay. Oops, I have to stop sharing. I forgot to optimize my sound. Do it again. Okay.
We're all autistic and we're unable to
start it. Here we go. Sorry.
Content warning. This film contains a description of the experience of being restrained. This section of the film has a warning immediately before it and is filmed in black and white to make it easy to skip past if you decide not to watch it.
Hi, I am Grant Blasco, a college-bound high school senior.
My name is Jordan Zimmerman. I communicate by typing on an iPad.
My name is Endeavor, and I'm a multimodal communicator.
Hi, I'm Isaiah Graywall from Canada. I type and spell to communicate.
We're all autistic and we're unable to rely on speech to be understood. Most of us are non-speaking. Some of us can speak a little, or from time to time. People have a lot to say about us. They write stories and biographies. They produce plays and make movies about us. But they are not listening to us.
Just because I cannot speak does not mean I don't hear. I hear everything people say to me or about me. I may not show understanding in my face, but I know and understand. Not a word said escapes my so strong ears.
We may be non-speaking and need help with many things, but that doesn't mean we can't contribute to a book, a play, or a movie. If you always leave us out, people think we are not able to participate. That's why most people don't realize that we have a contribution to make. Include us, and you will see that we have so much to give.
To anyone who wishes to represent non-speaking people, I ask that you communicate with us directly. Misrepresentation of non-speaking people leaves us more vulnerable to abuse.
I should not be left out of conversations or presumed incompetent, simply because I don't rely on spoken language.
There needs to be more representation of diverse autistic identities.
The media often shapes how we view ourselves and how others around us view and esteem our place in society. When there is lack of representation or improper representation, it directly feeds into the internalization of stigma, where your membership in a group is the very cause of your negative self-esteem, feelings of inferiority and even feelings of self-hatred.
If your story says there's no hope, people may not realize how many of us can share solutions about how to support non-speaking children and adults. People who write about us tell the world what they think is best. Other people who follow their example could hurt us rather than help us. To To be treated like a child just because you can't communicate in the usual ways is humiliating and traumatic.
The way to demean me is to speak to me as if I am a baby.
I don't like people talking about me like I am not there.
Some books and movies include scenes of restraint. These can be painful to watch. You may want to fast forward the next few seconds that are in black and white, where an autistic survivor talks about his experiences with prone restraint.
Every escalation was blamed 100% on me, no matter if they had just done something illegal to me, cornered me, taunted me, taken something I needed, whatever. Your body is tensing up. Your breathing tightens up. Your fists want to clench. You can feel your body betraying you. You can fight or fold. It's up to you. You are hitting the ground either way. You are face down on the floor. You may relax, you may beg, you may play dead. None of it works. If you show pain, they will show you more pain. I thought I was suffocating and I called out to say so, and they laughed. The way people who use restraint talk, you might think it is an almost surgical procedure. It's not. It is a fight with a predetermined winner, who isn't you.
How do we get it right? Consult non-speaking autists from the start and add key points throughout your project. Read our blogs and books. Watch our movies and videos. Learn about our lives.
If you have a voice, you can use it to help bring dignity back for the members of the more marginalized autistics. Let's change the plot lines and the narratives around non-speaking autistics so more and more are allowed to be visible in society and avail of opportunities in all kinds of areas. Then we will truly see more and more non-speaking autistic actors who will be able to provide us with more positive and authentic representations.
Ask us. Listen to us. Nothing about us without us.
Oh, wow. Right, you guys? Okay. Okay, let me stop. Stop share. Wow, right?
Heyo! What's up? It's your girl Paige here back again with another video.
Somebody.
Oh, we're doing
That's
it.
me.
I
I'm
have things I
sorry.
need to talk about.
You're muted, Karen.
Of course I am. Of course I am, because I have to do that at least once a day. I'm sorry. So what'd you think of that? I've been looking for
Well
something.
done.
I've been looking for something powerful to talk about restraints and getting rid of restraints. And the chances are that most of the folks that you work with, if you see and they have autism or any kind of intellectual disability and they've gone through the traditional school system, is that they have been restrained at some point, which is incredibly traumatizing. So you are going to be dealing with trauma and doing what you do. And Karen, I know you have extensive history working with folks, and I don't know if you want to say something about, you know, dealing with folks who've been restrained or have had, you know, any of these kind of trauma experiences.
You know, one of the things when I was listening to her, to the video, is my experience has been that with the way I talk to, like, especially like parents when I've had children who on the spectrum, is how we interpret behavior, how we interpret when I do something. So I was just sharing this with somebody last week that, you know, I had a client who really was, like, she would just be explosive. She was like 10 at the time. She would explode, just very, you know, scream, just different things. She was high functioning. So at this point, literally, she was not diagnosed. I knew she was. I was getting her diagnosed at the time. So, but her mom's interpretation of that was, she grew up in her mother, and this is why trauma is it's the generational trauma, because her mom grew up in a in a home that was very angry, very belittling. She was actually, she's a little person. So there was a lot of issues with just her father was an angry person. And because of that, she developed anger as a way to manage herself. So when she saw her daughter, her interpretation of her daughter is basically, my daughter's a brat and I need to, and I have to tell her that I'm in charge. But when I started to work with her and explain to her that of her anxiety, that they were doing something new, and that it could be that if you just asked her calmly what's going on, it began to change their relationship. Because of course, this young lady, she just didn't even know how to tell her, like they didn't have a good relationship because her mom was always yelling at her. And but as she began to learn to interpret her daughter's behaviors as not being always aggressive. Not, again, children always want their way at times. So I'm not minimizing that. Or I'm just saying that that's not always the reason that kids act out, especially when they're on the spectrum, is that there's a reason why they do. And their acting out is their language. Even if they can speak verbally, their language sometimes can be aggressive, because that's so much easier than actually saying, I get scared when it's raining outside. I get scared of this. It could be something very simple. So that's the word I've learned to use, is interpret, and how we interpret behaviors can make a difference in how we respond to them. And then we can help them and calm them and learn, oh, wow, that's why you're really upset. And then it's like the same way, then we're treating them as they're our respected peers, as opposed to somebody that's, I got to submit, get into submission so that they can work it out.
Exactly. Get into submission. Yeah, such a good way to put it. Yeah, thank you. That's the thing. And I think it was so sensitive of you to get the mother's trauma, because it's so easy when you're in this situation, you're finally realizing, and I've done this, like how traumatized that person with the disability is, and how controlling and how not productive that parent-child relationship is. It's easy to demonize the parent. I've done it.
Well, what I've learned,
parents' trauma.
The way I present it to parents is, you can't, the way you were parented was this way. And generally speaking, like I'll give an example. Autistic, they need warnings, they need predictability. And I'll say, and then you can teach them flexibility when they're stable, but when you were a kid and you were playing and your mom said to you, come on, Karen, it's time to get up. We're going to leave in a few minutes. Go get your shoes on. So stop playing your game. We're going to go do blah, blah, blah. And we're going to run these errands. And you learned, I'm not saying you always did it right, but you knew that your job was to get your shoes on, put your coat on, you were going to go do it. And you tolerated that flexibility. And so that's how we're trained as parents. And we only parent the way that we were trained. The way we just, unless you're taught something different. And so when I say that to my autistic child, we need to go now, and they flip out, I look at it as you're being oppositional, because that's what it would have been for me. I would have been oppositional if I had said, no, I'm not, and threw something at them. But for them, it's again, that predictability, that warning, and understanding that they have to have that predictability really is a way of their, how their brain works. And then it's a way of recognizing how it can be seen differently, versus if it's done so that they recognize that it's like, and parents typically can cue into it, what they're used to, what they're comfortable with. Yeah, that's what my mom did. That's what most people will tell you. That's what my mom did. This my dad did. This and grandma did. But when I can tell them, okay, that's that, and you're not being a bad parent or a wimpy parent if you're kind, if you slow it down, if you recognize their individual differences. Because sometimes parents who have been, kids who have been, adults who have been traumatized as children, it's really that they could feel so lack of power if they just say, okay, honey, whatever you want, because that's like almost re-traumatizing for them. But recognizing, no, this is a different way of empowering, by giving power, by saying, let me listen to you. Let me understand you, as opposed to, I'm in charge. I'll be in charge. Don't mess with me. So, and that's, is learning.
That's so wise. Thank you. Yeah. And I know, Mary, Dr. Mary, you do a lot of parent training, you were saying, and work with parents a lot.
So I'm not a doctor, but yes, I work with parents a lot. I do parent-child interaction therapy. And so as you're saying that, I'm thinking, yes, the relationship, yes, the countdowns, like in parent-child interaction therapy, we really work on like the attachment first before we get into the discipline. And I love Dr. Dan Siegel's work around this too.
Yeah.
Mention that, it makes me wonder about our parents with disabilities. Are they so afraid of being perceived as a bad parent when they get down? Like we see that so much, like if I'm not the strictest parent, like, cause I'm a parent with a disability, people are already judging me for having a disability, and then having a kid too. Like when you were speaking on that, it really was like, oh, that's something I know and need to remember and reflect on more with parents.
It's so true. It's so true. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know if Liz or Dr. Portia, I can't keep track of who's got the PhD and who Dr. everybody. But if Christina, Portia, or Liz want to add anything to that, just from your work as well.
This is just to kind of piggyback off of what Mary said and Karen about like the parents, like even parents that don't have disabilities, like they're always worried about how they're going to be perceived and if they're being a good parent, if they're doing it right. And so it's like finding that balance, like, you know, people are going to talk about you no matter what you do. You can do exactly what someone says and they'll still say, oh, nope, you did something wrong. Or you cannot do anything and people will say something. So you gotta kind of have to find out what works for you and what works for your child. But I think in the video they made, they mentioned something like when you're talking to us, like talk to us, don't talk to the person next to me so they can interpret, but talk to me. And I feel like that's also something that we learn, like when we work with someone who's bilingual or someone who doesn't always speak English, is like we don't talk to the interpreter because it's rude. You talk to the actual person and then the interpreter will interpret for you. But I think that also shows respect. And it's like, I see you, like you are a person, you are here, and I'm gonna acknowledge that, because I feel like if you don't do that, then it's like you minimize who they are and you make them feel like they're not important. Like, okay, so it doesn't matter if I'm here or not, because you're not even gonna treat me like a person anyway.
Oh, I love that. I love your analogy. I'm going to use that. I'm going to say, Dr. Portia Porter says, when we talk to somebody who has a different language, we talk right to them and let the interpreter interpret. We're not talking to the interpreter.
And in some ways, we also then correct parents, because we've all been around family where we said we would ask one person and they, Johnny, how are you? You know, how are you feeling about this or something like that? And then we'd have the parent especially, but there could be other people that would say, well, Johnny is like, you know, Johnny's not doing well with that. And it's like, excuse me, I was talking to Johnny. And I think sometimes we have to be respectful. And even because people who are on disability, who have a disability, they hear, unless they have a hearing issue, the issue is, you know, our mind, the way the mind works and how quickly they can answer does not mean that they're not going to answer. Sometimes we just can kind of assume just because I'm thinking longer and then I'm not paying attention, and I'm like in a different world, when really it's just that I'm processing it, and I might have a processing disorder, or maybe I'm just slower at doing it than you are. And we want to be like, we want to be quick, and that's not respectful.
That's great. So true. All right. So I am excited. I think the future is that we will be doing therapy with people who use assistive technology. So I have a friend who has asked me to work with her daughter. It's going to be very challenging because her daughter only does preferences with her. So I'm not quite sure how I'll do that, but she really wants me to do therapy with her daughter. Like it's yes, no, you know, this kind of thing. But you know, it's exciting for me because I feel like this is the future, that we have to figure out how to be there as emotional support, doing what we do for people who are non-speaking. That's the term I've got to start using. Non-speaking. Yeah, I'm learning.
I think that even though I respect what you were sharing about Carly's video, but I remember the first time I listened to it a few years ago, what it got my brain thinking on is how often that we've really we have minimized the life that is in a nonverbal person. And it was almost like the code was cracked and she recognized that she could, and she began to communicate and be herself. And it was, and I think that as we progress as a world that has technology, so those things can be connected, there's really more of an opportunity to recognize and respect the beautiful people around us that we have really minimized, and that grieved my heart. It made me remember when I'm old enough to say this, that when I was in college, you know, they talked about theory about infant development, because my background is in child development, where they would say that they really had these bizarre ideas before. I mean, before I was, you know, alive probably, but it was more of that that intelligence was determined when you started to speak. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Have you never been around a baby? I mean, babies, before they can verbally say hello and how are you, and are you, you know, I know I need my diaper changed, please. They were able, have you never been around a baby that they communicate whole bunches, and it doesn't take them that long to start letting you know how they're feeling or thinking. It just is in English, Japanese, Chinese, or Spanish. It is, but so that's kind of like that same interpretation. Like, I wonder who started that, you know, intelligence is determined by verbal only, because it's not, you know, it certainly was a falsehood that people like, yeah, anyways, there's my little soapbox.
No, it's so important. I love it. It's so true. Yeah, yeah. And that intelligence is just, you know, a little seed that blooms. No, no, no. And it blooms when they start talking. No, 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 no. Exactly.
They're all along.
20 babies. I love that. So I think our in terms of you're doing this training with therapists, and in terms of our work as therapists, I think as much experience as we can get in the world of autism and the autism spectrum is really critical. And then to share with others, because my experience has been that folks just blossom with the therapy once they really get that we're here to work out things, you know, that we're not trying to change them. We're helping them to figure it out. We're helping them to process. We're doing what we do, you know, and once they get, because especially folks who have had ABA and have had a lot of that, and by ABA, for you that aren't in that world, you know, that modifying the behavior, kind of a Skinnerian approach, right? Like B.F. Skinner, like, and we'll reward you for what's good and we'll punish you when you're not. Or now they say, oh, positive behavioral supports, that means we don't punish anymore. It's still all about your behavior. It's not about who you are. So that's why I'm like on this rampage for therapy, to get therapists to work with us, because even the most positive of behavioral interventions still ends up identifying that person by their behaviors and not by who they are. And that's very destructive. So I'm going to, now there's another one. So, oh, this is so good. Thank you, Mary. Oh my gosh. It's so good. You guys, you're there already. You could be doing this. So you're very inspiring to me. So I'm going to show one more video because I think this is really important. Unfortunately, I can't find it without Russian subtitles, although somebody did find it out there. I know it has Russian subtitles, but other than that, it's a really good piece where this woman named Emily Titan, who's a great advocate and does a lot of really good work in the autism community and in the community period, of sharing what's needed, where she just talks pretty frankly about it. And I like to show this because I think this is a really good guide, because she really talks about her childhood and the trauma and all kinds of stuff. Okay. All right. Again, it's going to take me a minute like it always does. Sorry, guys. I should have all this queued up or embedded. But sometimes when I embed, it doesn't work. So I just do things the old-fashioned way with the Russian subtitles. I will find it. I'm good. Let's see if I put English in. Can you guys guys hear that and see that? The video?
I hear it, but I don't, but I still see your Word
Can't.
document.
Okay, I'm gonna start.
Yeah, we can't see it.
Okay, we'll start over because you need to see it. All right, let me stop and go back. How about now? Let me see. Wait till it plays. You see that? You still don't?
No.
Okay.
You have to pull down your, maybe put away your Word document and then it won't, because it's your Word document.
Oh, it must be the wrong screen. Yeah, my Word document's on the, okay. All right, let's see. Oh, sorry, guys. Yep, I'll put that down. Let's see.
Emily Titan, who's an activist. She's a member of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the role of numerous other organizations. Suffice it to say, she's a very prominent activist in the neurodiversity community. So Emily, thanks for agreeing to be part of this video series.
Well, thanks for interviewing me. I'm flattered and honored.
Emily, to start off with, many people assume that autism is a disease that needs to be cured. I know one of the basic principles of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is autism isn't a deficiency, it's neurodiversity. Some people might say, what do you mean by neurodiversity? Could you talk about that?
Sure. Okay, so when I was young and when people didn't know any better, they said that there was this belief, and there still is with some people, that autistic people need to be cured, that we're broken and we need to be fixed and we're in our own little worlds and all this. And that's actually not true, at least to us. We believe that it's just another way to be. There's a quote on a t-shirt, autism, it's not a processing disorder, it's just a different operating system. And so that's a good way for, that's how I often explain it to my friends, is that it's simply another way of being, another way your brain is wired. So you take in information and process it differently than someone who doesn't see things that way would. So it's, if, like, say you're a Windows and I'm a Mac, and so our brains simply process things differently.
But we still get the same work done.
Exactly. We can definitely work together as long as people aren't trying to fix us or cure us. If people appreciate the differences in how we think and can say, hey, you don't need to be fixed. And that's kind of how I came, because for a long time I did think I was broken and such, because I was brought up with my parents and other people constantly trying to figure out what was wrong with me and dragging me from doctor to doctor. And finally I was like, I don't care anymore. I just want to be me and, be the best me I can as I am and not try to fix myself. And because I was like really depressed before that. So that's what I tell people now, that looking at being autistic is something to be cured and something that I was broken with. All it did was make me depressed. But then I started seeing, on the internet glimmers of, like, I think one of my first exposures to the neurodiversity community was on LiveJournal, and there was a conversation about bullying, and there was someone participating, and they had a picture, an icon next to their picture, or next to their account name, those things, and it said Autistic Liberation Front, and that kind of appealed to me. So I wrote to her and asked her what the Autistic Liberation Front was.
So, Emily, let me just pick up on one thing you said. You said your brain works and has a different operating system. If I could enter into your brain, I know this is a strange question, in what ways might it be different? So what differences would I notice?
You know, that's a really hard question to answer because I've never had a non-autistic brain, so there isn't anything that I can really compare it to.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that I can answer that. I'm trying to think about ways in which people interact with me, and I might look at them like, huh? I guess, yeah, here's an example. So from what I'm told, is people who aren't autistic would look at a mess in a room and they would say, you know, well, okay, let's look it over here, you know, because that's what they tell me to do. They say just concentrate on one area at a time, but with me, I just look at the mess as a whole and I get overwhelmed and sit down and say, forget it. Same thing if I've got like a bunch of dishes to do.
So what you're saying then is that when there's a lot of things to be done, it's hard to separate and sequence which things should be done first, second, third.
Right.
Is that right? That sort of hits you all at once and you're overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that happens. So like if I have friends who understand this and I can say over Facebook or something, you know, I'll write to them and I'll say, here's what I need to do, and then they'll break it down into steps for me, or they might call the cab company and call the cab for me, because sometimes I have a hard time talking, you know, calling people on the phone. I don't know why, I just do. As I said before, a lot of the thinking has been geared towards fixing or working on, normalization, making us undistinguishable from our peers, our non-autistic peers. And so that, you know, the assumption there is that we have to be like everybody else, that there's something wrong with the way we are and the way we think. And so they're trying to take Macs and make them into Windows, going back to the metaphor. And you can't really do that without breaking the Macintosh. So although we can do, you know, there are emulation programs for Windows on the Macintosh, and we can emulate a non-autistic person to an extent, but it's extremely taxing on us, and it really takes a lot of our energy, and it's very hard to do. And there's something called the autistic crash that we sometimes talk about, and that happens when you've been forced to be normal for such a long time, and then you get to a point where you just can't do it anymore, and you kind of fall down emotionally and mentally, and you get really depressed and stuff. And that's why there are some, you know, papers that went around that I read when I was younger that you know, why do people regress in their 20s and 30s? And I think that happens when we reach that point. So that's one reason, is that making us normal, trying to make us normal, is actually really, really, really bad for us and painful.
And I imagine, if I can interrupt, all that pressure creates more anxiety.
Exactly, right.
Even more difficult to emulate normal behavior.
Exactly, like, you know, I can remember my father and my mother, you know, smacking my hands down when I was stimming. Now, they were doing that because they didn't understand what was wrong, or what, you know, in their perception, what was wrong with me. And I can remember my dad telling me, you know, why are you doing that? You don't want to look, you know, the R word, you know, retarded or anything. So, and that's what they would say. Or he would say, or my quote unquote favorite, which wasn't favorite at all, was when I'd break some social rule and he'd get really angry at me and he'd say, you know exactly what you did wrong. And I'd try and ask him what I'd done wrong and he wouldn't tell me, probably because of the assumption I was talking about earlier that, you know, he just thought I was being defiant and non-compliant. You know, I talk about, you know, all behavior is communication. So everyone, especially non-speaking people, when they bang their heads, people say, oh dear, they're hurting themselves, let's stop the behavior. And they might send them to a place like the Joe Trottenberg Center where they get shocked, or some other facility that uses less painful methods of behavior modification. But what they don't do is they don't say, why is this person banging their head? What is he or she trying to say? Or why is he or she so frustrated they're doing it? And, you know, I don't think I even necessarily knew it was frustration myself. I wondered why, but I didn't know what it was until I was, you know, reading Amanda Bagg's blog, and that spelled it out. It was, you know, out of sheer frustration. That's why she would do it. So frustration can be a thing, and that resonated with me.
Yeah, and from what I know from all of my friends who are autistic, for example, Cal Montgomery says when she bangs her head, that is the way she has it with blows off steam. I know other people who say, I don't want to bang my head, but my body starts banging it for me.
Yeah, that's another.
So it can be frustration, it can be relief, it can be involuntary, and to presume that it should be stopped without understanding why is not only dumb, it's cruel.
Yeah, it's, you know, how do you feel if you were trying to, I mean, if all behavior is communication, so you take it as communication, right? So if you're trying to have a conversation with me and every time you start to speak to me, I jump on you and knock you to the ground, you're not going to be very happy.
You're right, if I'm trying to talk and you're restraining me every time, at some point I'm going to slug you and you're going to see.
And then if I'm staff, I'm going to write that down as a serious incident report and say he slugged me, and they might use, I don't know, what chemical restraint.
It's the whole idea that I think many staff and many parents and many behavioral therapists feel the responsibility to make autistic people do what the normal people should think they should do, rather than saying, wait a minute, you know, why do I need a person to stop flapping their hands? Why do I need someone to look me in their eyes? For example, if I know an autistic person has trouble with eye contact, I'm quite happy looking away and talking. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not a sign of disrespect or anything, and a lot of people, thank goodness, are coming to know that. But when I was younger, I actually had a boyfriend who would insist that I make eye contact with him, and he thought he was doing the right thing. See, that's the thing, is that a lot of this thinking comes from a place of, you know, having to fix, and, you know, that thinking that people are doing the compassionate thing when they do this, but it actually hurts our brains to make eye contact or to try and think in other ways.
So it's almost like control,
right,
disguised as help.
Yeah, paternalistic control disguised as help. I know people who lived their whole lives and have never been given the opportunity to communicate, have never been given the opportunity for real friends, and by real friends I mean people in the community who might appreciate getting to know them, but they've been kept segregated. And, you know, one of my friends passed away a few years ago, and he never communicated because he grew up in an institution and he wasn't given any communication devices. And then he moved, I guess in his 30s, he moved into a group home, and they said, you know, he's too old to learn any communication skills, so nothing was ever offered to him. And so he would do this, wave his hands. He was non-speaking autistic, and he was great. And then he got sick, and they did various things for him, but I'm not sure they did enough for him. But the hospital actually sent him home on hospice, and he's, you know, right, sometimes beating his head on the wall or beating other body parts, or, you know, and all they did was that, you know, they got him a helmet for his head and something that went around his waist. But, you know, they got him contraptions to try and control his behavior instead of listening to his behavior. And that was really upsetting to me. And I remember a few days before he died, I went over to visit him, and he just held my hand for a while and gave me a hug. And I told him, I promised him that I was going to work to make sure that no one was ever treated that way and denied access to communication and healthcare, for their whole life.
That one is powerful, isn't it? And when she says that she read Amanda Baggs' blog, that's the same person that did Being an Unperson. Amanda Baggs. So who was Mel Baggs and then passed away, became non-binary, and then respiratory illness. It sounded like COVID. But I thought that was impactful. That one I've shared for years. And you can see, I would say about 90% of the folks that I work with autism have had that experience of being corrected over and over again, feeling like they have to change. They're not okay as they are. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Even when it's defined as autism. Back for her, it wasn't even understood as autism. But even when it's defined as autism, you still have to get these skills and be this way and do this stuff. So, they're bringing that to you, I think, and that's an important context to have. Okay. Let me go to share my screen and go, oops. Sorry about that. And go to my PowerPoint. Okay, so that's autism. And I think it's just really important for us to, when we train therapists and when we do the therapy, to really focus on autism, really focus on that when you're, if you're doing a training with other therapists. So the next is the grief work. I hope I didn't go over this with you before. I don't think so. I think I'm in the right place. Okay, I've been writing it down now.
Karen, Karen, before we leave autism, if that's a thing, I'd like to just say that I personally began my journey in the autism spectrum because mostly because I was working in-home and started noticing that my clients were on the spectrum. They had they were oppositional and odd at the same time. So, and I started looking at the diagnosis, and I had a friend who was actually we had the conversations about what Asperger's was at the time. And I mentioned Asperger's, and which of course now we don't use that term, but it's, high functioning autism, because as a clinician, understanding that sometimes your clients, they may be on the spectrum and no one else, you might be the first person to notice it. I just really say I really had the privilege of, like, I would say in the 2000s, of really bringing a lot of of recognizing that people who are on the spectrum, and then when I had a staff that they were also, they were just used to me asking certain questions so that they would get them diagnosed, because those who are high functioning are different. When they're lower functioning, it's like, okay, there's a problem. When they're high functioning, we just think they're neurotypical, and we think that we diagnose them differently. And it's really important for staff to recognize that, when there is that oppositional behavior, like when they're not, to interpret, to kind of take a step back and to see if it fits. And some things fit, and that even though we can't diagnose them as therapists, social work or counselors cannot diagnose autism spectrum disorder. But at the same time, you certainly can have a clue, and that's a time to look at it, because that can often be a way to get people, it can be amazing. And my favorite story is a young man, I'll just take a second, but my first 10-year-old that I helped with, he was, in a home. They were literally ready to get him into a long-term residential program. He was in foster care. And because I recognized that, they got him tested. He went from being, before I knew him, they told me that he drooled involuntarily. He was on so much medication. And they started to, take him off medication. He was in a new foster home who was really like spry. They were really good people. They're both former teachers. And so they were really spry on it. He started taking less medicine. He realized he was smart. And he never saw himself that way. And he was, I mean, he just was rattle off thinking, and that was his life change. I mean, he saw it, you know, he had normal issues. He had things that he had to work through as he got older. His family, you know, there was, but at the same time, there was this difference because he started to have a different identity than like because his first foster parents thought him as being, I think self-diagnosed him as having multiple personality disorder, because I don't know where they got their degree from, but apparently you know, he had some oddities, but what I recognize is because they were so super rigid themselves that they couldn't handle the fact that, you know, so he just kind of would dissociate. I think he did dissociate a little bit during those times, but he never did around when I knew him, because he was in a very stable, loving place. And, you know, they were, you know, he started learning more how to handle things. And, you know, and I think that because most kids especially they're higher functioning, they can begin to have that self-reflection of, or like, I'm different than you. And then let me celebrate, and like, oh, I need to work on, well, this is why I struggle with certain things, because society, you still have to do things in the world, but that doesn't mean you can't, you know, like do them your way, or recognize that, you know, okay, I have to do it a little differently. And I just, but I think it's important because sometimes people don't, it's not always recognized. It's recognized more now than it was 15, 20 years ago, but it's still a thing that sometimes, because it's just, you know, it's right on that edge where it's not always seen. And I unfortunately I have a client in their 20s who was just diagnosed. I mean, late 20s, who just last year. And you know, part of his grief and what we're working through is his stinking anger over the fact that he was disrespected all these years. And his parents were very supportive and tried and pushed, but it wasn't until this past year that he could get a psychological and some other things that happened that make it happen. But at the same time, I'm just saying that because I just think whenever I ask about someone over 5, I say, well, this is how long they were misinterpreted and misunderstood. Because I'm sure, you know, you've had clients that were in their 50s. I've had, you know, older clients who just found out. And so I just, you know, so often they get, you know, abused by their, or just belittled and disrespected by their own family members because they're trying to get them into the neurotypical, you know, narrow place. And when they don't, you know, because they can't, because that's not who they are. It's like, doesn't work. So
right.
It's right. That.
And exactly, like I can't be an Olympic athlete. I cannot. It will not happen. Yeah. So it's like we are who we are. Do you guys want to take a 5-minute break? Take a break. Thank you, Karen. That's really great. All right. So
I think I've seen that gentleman who did the interviewing in the last.
Yeah.
I've seen him before. I can't remember what.
Yeah. He has a whole series. He's really great.
What is his name?
Norm Kuntz.
Okay.
I'm not sure how he pronounces it, but I love him. I love him so much. And I have shown his video, and I'll probably show it at the end of everything. I'll probably show it next week. I love your story, and really what a gift to people that you're that you've diagnosed so many people, or just, you know, detected it. Of course we say, yeah, we're technically not diagnosing, but you are, like, thank goodness, right?
That's how it has been. Yes, because it's like it can change how you, and actually even how parents see their children, because when they're just like, they don't get it, then they think that their kids are, I don't know, they have all kinds of, you know, again, it's that interpretation of it, you know, like how terrible they are as parents, or that they can't get it together, and why can't my kids behave? And it's like, because they don't respond the same way. And then they start to recognize and heal because they can see, oh, this is what they need, etc.
Right. Exactly. So I'm going to go a little bit into, you know, and that's the thing, like, it's so liberating for the parent too. Like, okay, you've got the right diagnosis. This is what you're dealing with. It's not, you're a bad parent. Yeah, it's such a big piece. All right, I'm going to move forward here. I have on my website, KarenHarvey.org, the Goodbye book. There's also another site where a lot of my materials are, where they're all free, pid.thenadd.org. And I have a lot of the workbooks, but I really believe that doing the grief counseling is so critical. As I shared with the trauma program that we had, the Healing Center, it was shocking when we found and realized, wow, grief is at the core of so much trauma, right? That so even folks where we knew they'd have other really bad traumas, so much just came back to who they lost in their life. And I just think grief counseling is really important. It's, if possible, it's wonderful to do in group. And I'm wondering if I should have a slide about group, but at the same time, I don't want to chase anyone away because it's so logistically hard to do groups. But I mean, we can talk about it in the context of doing group work, of doing grief, right? So having a grief group is really effective. And I'm sure many of you have had grief groups and done that. And it's with all humans, you know, it's really good. It's a great thing, but somehow I find group is so effective with folks with disabilities also because that feeling like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Wow, I'm not alone. So, you know, that just that tremendous impact that, you know, being so isolated in your loss and how that breaks that isolation. So the grief and loss counseling are critical. Again, people know how to do this. They're trained. You know, this is a big thing. This is an area. I think, honestly, I think we're going to be so busy. None of us will ever have to worry about being out of work. We're just going to be so busy with everybody. I know I'm seeing people without disabilities now because there's just so many referrals, right? My boss keeps asking me, keeps sending me, can you see this person? Can you see that person? Right? I'm like, I'd really rather just see people with disabilities, but I don't have that choice anymore. And, you know, with COVID, it's just so tough. And then I think now we're going to start dealing with people's grief and who they've lost as they begin to process it.
Well, and that kind of goes along with what I had texted Karen during the week and shared with her that I would like to see a growth in group, or not group, in group and like day programs and in group homes to encourage that socialization between peers, because I feel like it's all almost like we want them to be nice to each other, but we don't really encourage relationships. And I think that would really address some of that grief of the sense that you belong. You know, it's not just that, oh, you're not here. Oh, I wondered where you were, but that you're a friend. And what that means, because I feel like that can make a difference as to how much how serious the grief is, so that when there is a staff turnover, it's not the same. It's more significant if I have no friends in the actual community that I'm in. And how do I encourage community among, whether it's in a day program or in their home, if they're in a home of some sort, because that's really where you're going to find, I don't know, that's where you have friends. I mean, where you're at. And but we often don't, I don't know if that's really taught.
It's not taught at all. And it's almost, that's the critical element of healing. You know, you heal through relationships, you heal through friendships, we support each other as humans. And just to think that people are kind of cut off from that is just the saddest thing. You know, I just, that one just kills me. I love that you said that. I agree with you so strongly. Like, that should be a big element in programming. to get people to have relationships. And that's when you're less affected, right, by a loss if you have other relationships. If that's your only relationship, yeah, it's devastating. So I just really agree so strongly that we've got to figure that out. But one thing we can do, even though we can't change programs, you know, as a therapist, you can't always infiltrate. You can make suggestions, but you're not always infiltrating the program. What we can do is we can shore up those social skills of making friends and do that role play of asking someone to come over and getting somebody's phone number and arranging, you know, meeting for coffee, doing that role play, practicing, having a homework assignment to reach out and get a phone number, you know? So those little steps in therapy really help as well. So that's the one thing we can do, even though we can't change programs, because that should be a focus. And the small losses are big. So here's the point, right? When there's so few people in your life, you lose one, it's devastating. It's devastating either way, but when you have other friends who are helping you through it, it's so much better. It's so much better, right? Like we're all helping each other. With two of my friends lost their mothers in the last couple of months. And, you know, we're just all helping each other. And it's so much better than if they were by themselves. Staff turnover is actually an issue. You know, it really is. And people are very affected by it. Sometimes they take it personally too. This person left me. It's an abandonment issue at times. Yeah. And it gets personalized. So do that grief work. I would feel it out, you know. Who have you lost? You know, because sometimes people are really dealing with it, but they haven't really expressed it. Or it's been so long, but they're still grieving. So we don't expect them to still be grieving because their father died 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but they're still grieving. That past is present. So I put this triangle in because I always have it everywhere, no matter what I do. Because this is how I believe this is really programmatic. And so I really originally started thinking about this and putting it together from reading Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, which is, of course, one of the Bibles of trauma. It's a great book. And she was one of the first people to really recognize how much trauma there was around with not just vets, because we were always talking about trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder in terms of vets, but not in terms of people just in everyday life. And she was actually I believe she was working in a hospital. She was a psychiatrist, and she was contacted by ER nurses who said, oh my goodness, you know, we have these women coming in with broken bones, black eyes, and they have some ridiculous story about how they got it that we know isn't true. And we don't know what to do, and we need help for them. So Judith Herman and got herself and some other clinicians, and they started trying to work with these women. And she was talking about in her book that the work would not be effective if the women weren't safe. You know, if they were going home to an abuser, then no matter what you did, you guys know, right? You probably all worked with people in abusive situations, and until they leave that abusive situation, it's almost like you have the same session every week, because they're going back and they're totally destabilized. So no matter what you did to help them stabilize, help them focus, help them try to move forward, they're back. It's all undone. So it's like you're in this loop with them until they can get to be safe. So because of her work, those safe houses that we have now developed, right, where people can go and be hid, you know, who are being domestically abused. Like we have the House of Ruth in Baltimore. I'm sure you have some. As she said, number one, people have to be safe. So you might be working with someone who's in a group home situation where they don't feel safe. And that's that. Until they're out of an unsafe situation, it's very hard to do good work, because anything you do is being undone when they get home. So, and that's always a delicate balance. And that's where we advocate for people without their knowing it. So that's where I contact managers and directors and advocate for them, but not doing it in the session. Because then that's all you become, is someone that can help them. In the session, I work on those self-advocacy skills, right? Right. What can you do? Who can you call? Okay, your homework assignment is to make that phone call, you know, and are you okay with using the phone? And when is it that the staff's not there that you can talk to someone about that staff? And, you know, helping them with an action plan to really self-advocate. And, you know, I put down perceived safety. So she talks about safety, and we always talk about safety in the trauma world, right? That has to be first. And if people aren't safe, that's that. Nothing else we're doing is going to really have an impact until they can be safe. But also there's, in the disability world, I always talk about perceived safety. Because we might think somebody's really great and everything about them is wonderful. This is the best staff. You know, I've had people tell me, well, their paperwork is perfect and this is the best staff we have, when I keep saying, I don't think it's a good fit. I think this staff person is not working well with this guy. And then later found out that there was abuse going on. Horrible. But perceived safety is that person. I've learned, if that person doesn't feel safe, then just, they're not safe. No matter how many other people are going to tell you this is a great situation, everything's fine, if they're feeling unsafe, they're unsafe. Because they perceive it.
Exactly. And don't argue with them about it.
Right.
Instead of help them to be safe.
Exactly. And then connection, you know, having that connection is so important. And here again, you know, she said, we're talking about people not having friends again, right? How devastating it is. And she said that, you know, women in domestically abused situations, the husband would isolate them and say, you know, I don't want you seeing your friends. I don't want you talking to your mother, your sisters. And the more they isolated them, the more they could control them. So, and the more isolated you are, the less power you have in your life and the less hopeful you are. And, you know, the more just shut down. And if we look at that in the context of what's gone on with COVID and how really isolated people are, you know, it's tough. So people really need that connection. And for us in our disability world, they need technology, because many of them don't have that smartphone, can't do FaceTime with somebody, maybe don't have people's phone numbers, can't access the Zoom. There's a little bit more of that now, thanks to COVID and thanks to the fact that there's a thing called Appendix K, where the feds have funded, you know, funded all kinds of virtual stuff that they say you can count as a day program if you do it virtually. So now all of a sudden we're getting people devices so that they can work virtually. But so that connection is really, really critical. And then finally, empowerment. So a lot of our folks don't have real choices. You know, they don't have choices. They have choices on paper. They have a nice yearly meeting where they're what they want to do. And maybe it's a person-centered plan, and the person-centered planning people are great. And we talk about what's important to them and what's important for them and all their dreams and goals. And sometimes we even draw pictures, but then it doesn't happen. That's so many of our folks. And people will tell you, you know. So if they can have real choices in their life, that's really critical, really, really important. And sadly, a little bit rare. Okay, and then Eric Erickson talks about so now, I know several of you have backgrounds in child development and development. And Eric Erickson is an old guy. He's dead, gone. But I still go back to him because I love his theory of the lifelong, the lifespan of development, and the psychosocial conflicts in each stage to resolve. I usually have a slide of the different stages. Sorry, I didn't put that in there. But I think that, so for me, and working with folks with disabilities, I have found, and I strongly believe that it's so critical. What happens in adolescence is actually so devastating. So Erickson teaches that there's a conflict to resolve in each stage of development. So he was the first attachment theorist, right? Because he said phase number one as an infant, it's trust versus mistrust. That's all attachment, right? Do you have an insecure or a secure attachment? So that trust versus mistrust is the issue. Like, can you trust your caregiver, or are you constantly having to scream and plead to get your food and diaper change? Or is there avoidance? Is there no trust at all because that person isn't responsive and they're not sensitive? So he really laid that out. And then he has a series of stages moving up to adolescence. And in adolescence, he's in each stage being a conflict that has to be resolved, right? In order to really be successful, to move forward successfully and not have hangups in the previous stages, like not being able to trust anyone because nobody fed you on time, or these other issues some of us may have. So when we go all the way into adolescence, and there he says, adolescence is that critical period where you get that identity, right? So the conflict to resolve in adolescence is basically what he calls role confusion versus identity. Like, do you get that identity? Do you have a sense of who you are? Or are you confused about it? So we know this, like in our work with folks without disabilities, right? Like people grapple with who they are. I mean, how many of us have worked with somebody having a midlife crisis who, oh, this isn't who I am. This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. Who am I? What am I? So right, we get that. We get that sense of identity being so important. A true identity, not a false identity, not just taking that identity that your family gave you or that you're told, this is who you are, and you feel like, okay, I've got to be this person. Like so many folks in my generation, I'm very old, came out in their 50s and 60s, which I think is so sad. Like, oh, this is really what I was, but I couldn't trust myself and I didn't feel free to be this. And, so that sense of identity. What I believe happens with people with disabilities, and I'm very adamant about this, I wrote a book about it, which is hard to find. It's on the NADD website. Oops, sorry about that. I don't know what's wrong with this slide. There's a little issue here. I will fix it. I know what it is. Sorry, guys. And you'll have to bear with me because I was cutting and pasting my slides because I never do anything the same twice. And here we go. Negative identity versus a positive identity. Thank you. Back to the slideshow. Okay, that's better. So what happens for people with disabilities is that during that critical developmental period, and you guys, developmental psychology, it's all about your critical developmental periods, right? If you have that right stimulation and that right experience and interaction at that critical developmental period, you get what you need developmentally and you're able to move forward. So in adolescence, you need to form and get that right stimulation, that right interaction to get a sense of who you are, to be able to move into a successful adulthood. And if you don't, you have these constant unresolved issues. I believe it's not identity versus role confusion in the disability world, in intellectual disabilities. It's negative identity versus positive identity. So it's what you're not. So in that same period, that time period, when you and I were figuring out what our strengths were, maybe, we listen to people all the time, so we may as well be a therapist. We had really neurotic parents that used us for a therapist, so we just kept it going. Whatever our choices were, we just did what we did and we figured out who we were. But during that same period, when you're finding out your strengths and figuring out what you can do in your life, we had that people with disabilities were finding out, oh, you're not going to drive. Oh, you're not getting married and having kids. You're not getting the good job. No, and your brothers and sisters went to college, but not you. Right? So this is an issue. Not the person who plays on the sports team, not the person who's liked or popular, sometimes not going to the dances, the homecoming, sometimes going but not having a date. So many things. So I believe a really important piece of therapy with people with intellectual disabilities, particularly, I mean, with all ages, but particularly from adolescence forward, is helping them to develop that positive sense of self. Who am I? What do I contribute? Who are my friends? You know, what do I do well? What are my preferences? Some people don't even know their preferences. Yep. Because they're, you know, they've been defined by their behaviors. Well, I'm good today. I'm being good. When you ask them how you are, they tell you about their behavior, not about how they actually are feeling. I've been good today. I was bad yesterday. I hit somebody on Tuesday. No, that's not how are you. But that's what I hear constantly because we've defined people by their behaviors, you know. And so these workbooks that I have on my website are designed, I have my book about hope to really, you know, explore for them what their values are and what they believe in, their spiritual values, their, you know, moral values. Who are you and what do you believe? You know, my book about making a difference. I have my book to celebrate me, which is just something you can use in therapy. You can use it in initial sessions to just like, let's find out who you are. And if folks don't write, you write it for them. If they do write, you can talk about it and then they write and then you talk some more and they write. It's a nice process. And I've been able to use these workbooks to develop that sense of self, working on that sense of self. I'm not saying this is a giant miracle and all of a sudden they finish the workbook and they jump up and they know who they are and life is great. But it's, no. But it's one more tool, one more thing that we can use in this process, which I think is so critical, that positive identity approach, you know, building the self. And one thing I've done is using the narrative. So, and the narrative of their life, you know, after we build rapport, of course, we're always building rapport and always trying to win trust and rapport, trust and rapport, trust and rapport. You know, that's everything in the beginning because they're expecting you to tell them about their behavior or side with their staff or side with their parents on what's wrong with them. So we have to, you know, build that trust, build that rapport, build that trust, build that rapport. And then as we get past that, and I always try to help people to tell their story, but then with them telling their story, I'm reframing it, and a little cognitive behavioral thing, with them as the hero. Oh my, look at you. Look at what you accomplished. Like their little odyssey, like, you know, they're going through, there's the sirens and there's the, you know, you have been through this life and you are really a hero that you have endured. So when people talk about bullying, that they put up with what they put up with. When they talked about school, that they had the difficulties that they had, that they kept going. So really trying to reframe their view of themselves as their hero in their own story, right? The protagonist, the one who's really, you know, doing it. And this story is their story and it's about them, because so often with disabilities, it's about everybody else. And your job is to become compliant and you're not. So you have to work on yourself. So who's compliant really? But, you know, oh, this is so front and center for folks with disabilities. No, how about, like all of us, we're the protagonists of our own story. And how wonderful is that? And I think that's a very powerful tool in therapy, you know, and that narrative with the individual as hero. And then we have the workbooks. And then there's art projects you can do. So we have in the healing center, we had little gingerbread men that we cut out, and people were, or gingerbread type, like just a little figure, and they would decorate it. We had all kinds of art supplies where they would put dresses on and have a cell phone, like, this is who I am and I'm really cool because I have my cell phone and I love wearing dresses. And this other guy had a cap, and then he had little blurbs where they say things, oh, stay out of trouble, kids, because he used to help the kids in the neighborhood. So we have these little art projects where you kind of design it around, you know, building that sense of self. Like, here, this is you. You've got all these supplies, put it together. And that's really fun. And then my friends, Heather Rivera, who I used to supervise, and Jen Herman, they came up with the strength project where they would have, you know, a outline of an arm, like with a muscle. And then they would write down all the strengths, have the person list all their strengths, right? And we put those up on the wall. This is who I am, and these are my strengths. So anything that's really building that sense of self, and I'm sure you guys can come up with 100 more things, right? So maybe I'll stop right now and we'll discuss that for a minute, that building that positive identity. And that's something I believe we can do with anyone. Like anybody in any kind of therapeutic setting needs to see themselves more positively, right? Needs to have a sense of identity too. That strong, who am I, is everything. So, and for me, this is the particular most critical issue when doing therapy with people with disabilities. The trauma work, I don't want to say most critical, it's all critical. Trauma work is really big, but then how are we recovering, right? We have to recover based on a sense of self, not just be a victim who survived it, but I'm still a victim, you know, to get them out of that victim, to get them out of that I'm the person with the disability, and get them into I have this cool life because I have these cool strengths and this is who I am. Any thoughts on that or ideas about that?
I love doing the DBT tree of like life and doing like values work and all that. And it's really cool to tie that in with people with disabilities, like really recognizing they're more than their disability.
So important not to be defined by that disability. So critical.
When you were mentioning preferences, there's been times where with my clients, I start off with the basics, and I would ask them, if I'm taking you to Dairy Queen, do you want chocolate or vanilla? And sometimes they, you know, because a lot of times I hear a lot, this is like my litmus test to see how much they know themselves and will say and voice what they like, because I'm only giving you two choices. I'm not taking you to Baskin Robbins where you're going to figure out like all kinds, or the grocery store, and you're choosing between chocolate and vanilla. And if they have, and it tells me something about them if they can say, oh, I like vanilla, or I like chocolate, and they don't just say, I don't care, because, and I won't give them the ability, they can't swirl it, because that's like, it's, you have to, because part of learning is about saying I have a choice. You know, I like, my hair is short, but Mary's hair is long. And that was a preference on our part. And that defines that she is different than me. And that's so cool. And that's what I try to encourage, that it's cool that you're different than me. You don't have to be like me, or let everybody else, or mom, or whoever, or your girl, or, you know, your friend, etc. But that's kind of one of those things I always start with, because, you know, I haven't met a person yet who doesn't identify with ice cream, you know, so I, you know, like, but it also makes it very concrete so they can start to decide, well, I'm going to ask you these questions of, you know, so do you like Christmas better or Valentine's Day? Because that kind of makes them think, you know, this is a part of who I am. And I don't like this time of year, that time of year as much, or, you know, whatever the reason is. I don't think anyone's ever said I don't like chocolate, so that's not really the issue. But anyway, so that's one of the things I think of, just to kind of get people to, because they haven't really thought, no one's asked them, well, what do you like?
That's right. People tell them. This is what we have now. It's such a, I love that. I love that litmus test because I have, been with people and, they said, well, what are you having? What are you going to get? Yeah. No, tell me what you like.
Exactly. Isn't
So
how
you
I
like-
know. Right, because and that's really also litmus test on how much they feel safe with you.
Yeah.
If they don't, I'm just like, whatever, Karen, like, oh, I'm okay. Or, oh, I like that too. Then maybe I'm not willing to tell you that, I really don't like something that's more serious and obviously more important than what kind of ice cream you like. But if I can't say I like that, and then also you might start saying random weird things like, well, I really like eating sardines with my ice cream, just to see what people will say, because then you'll like know whether or not they're really like, it's okay to be different than you. And that usually makes them giggle. But that also is a way to kind of like help them feel like, oh, you're safe. You're okay.
Yeah. And then they get ice cream. I would like to have you for my therapist.
Much better in home than it does in outpatient.
Yeah. And then because it gets you out of that house, because that's always awkward too when you got family sitting around there and you're trying to do some therapy. Oh my gosh, I've done that for years. It's tough. Yeah. And it's like, and like Mary said with the DBT values work, it's very similar. Like, these are my values. And it's so hard for people because no one has asked them. No one has asked them, or when they ask them, it's at a yearly meeting where they're just reciting with they think they should say, or they're getting their staff is saying it for them. So many times you see that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll go back. Did you want to say something, Mary? I see your face. Okay, so nice. All right, guys, on to the next one. And, oh, sorry. And this is right in line with what Karen was talking about, to foster that internal locus of control, versus external. Do I let the external define me? I think that's a struggle for all of us, right? Do I feel horrible when somebody says something critical? Do I let my self-esteem and everything I think about me go down the tubes in that 1 minute when people point out something they don't like or do whatever? Or, so we all struggle with that. Or am I so centered in myself and believe so strongly in what I'm doing that I'm clear when I get good feedback versus when I'm just getting sniped at, right? And I'm not destroyed, right? Because this was a tough world we live in. But, that, again, that takes that sense of self and that being centered in self. And, I love the concept of mindfulness, and I've worked on mindfulness with folks, but it's very hard to help people with disabilities to even have that mindfulness or centering in self when they don't even have a sense of self. So we have to start where we're at, and we start where we're at, and that's building that sense of self, and then refocusing that internal versus external locus of control, that they can check in with themselves on things versus always asking you what they should be thinking, what they should be doing, or getting the cues from their entire environment without checking in and having a sense of self. So again, the self and the self-work is so critical. I like this slide. What matters most is how you see yourself. Aw. And then I think this will be the last one, because then I only have one slide after that, but it is a lot to talk about, and I will show some videos for next week. And then we'll process how you want to move forward and what your thoughts are about everything. But I love this quote from Daisaku Ikeda, who's a great Buddhist scholar. And he says, ultimately, happiness rests on how you establish a solid sense of self or being. So that's happiness, And that's really critical. And honestly, and that's what I'm going to talk about next week, is happiness. And honestly, we don't often think about in the disability world, in the system, you know, in services for people with disabilities, you don't hear the word happiness come up a lot. So no one's saying to them, what really makes you happy? Or what are your interests? What would you like to pursue? Right? They're being programmed for. They're being assessed. Here's what your needs are. Needs assessments over and over and over again. And then we have goals. And then we have more goals. And then we work on our goals. And we have a task analysis of goals. And that's kind of a terrible tragedy, right? That there's a whole population of people that we don't even discuss or comprehend happiness with. The rest of us talk about happiness all the time. What makes you happy? What kind of work you like? What this and that? What you want in a relationship? What you don't want? You know? And then there's this whole population of being told, yeah, this is what you need to work on. This is your needs assessment. And even when we just assess strengths, which is so much better, and some people are starting to do that, it still becomes, you know, okay, here's your strengths so you can work on yourself and do what you need to do to get better at life by building on your strengths. Still, the goal is not happiness. So even the strengths-based approach, which is so much better, still isn't really exploring what makes people happy or fulfilled. And here's where I think as therapists, we can introduce this idea. Like, what do you know? You could be happy. What do you know? You could enjoy your life. And I think that makes a big difference. So I'm not going to jump into all the happiness stuff because that is pretty involved. It's not that involved, but I have a happiness assessment I'm going to share with you. And you probably got it as a handout from Gabrielle. And so I'm going to go over that next week because I think that's really enjoyable to do in therapy. I make it part of the behavioral intervention. So I'm doing a training this afternoon, and which I've been doing on writing a trauma-informed behavior plan. Because I think that's really critical. Like our behavior plans can be pretty negative sometimes. And we sometimes give aides and staff a green light to be very controlling, or we encourage them and encourage power struggles without realizing it in the behavioral plans that we have out there.
I've also noticed that with our ISPs, our treatment plans, because, I mean, honestly, when have you actually just said, well, I need to go do some coping skills? I had a bad day. I mean, nobody does that. And, you know, we can understand that. We can teach adults that, but, or, you know, like some people, but I just feel like, so I got a client, one of my first ID clients that I've gotten that was moderate. And that's what they had their treatment plan. And when it was transferred to me, I just said, okay, we're going to change this. I said, I want every day going to do a couple of things that make you smile. Of course, she said that. What makes you smile? Well, when I get to color and when I get to talk on the phone with my, you know, with so-and-so or something, like there was things like she could talk about. And it's like, and then I could tell the staff, she needs to do at least 2 or 3 things a day that are going to make her smile. And, you know, that it was clear. She just understood that conversation. But sometimes our treatment plans, I mean, sometimes are really, we don't usually make our treatment plans as person-centered as we say we do. Let's be true. I hate treatment planners. I think they're a bunch of hooey. And it's like, because it's a lot of really big words for graduate students. It's not really big. And it's like, how do I say to you, I don't want to cry as much. You know, how do we say, how can I talk about my mommy? Like for her, it was particularly her mom had died just about a year before. Let's celebrate that your mommy died, you know, like your mommy's life, you know, and like, let's do things that make you think of those and things that make it sense that she understood and make her smile. Cause I feel like and I just feel like sometimes we just really do like to use big words because it makes, I don't know, maybe because we're not comfortable with using ordinary words that they can be effective in you know, in processing things, or you know,
I agree
in the chart because we wanted to make it sound like, you know, we have a vocabulary. Well, who cares about your vocabulary? I'm talking about myself, because their clients don't care. They may actually they actually get more of an overwhelming sense of, I don't know anything and you're the professional. And I don't really want them to have that. I don't want them to feel like that I got it together in a way that makes them look less than me. I want them to know that I may know some things to help them, but not like in the sense that they can, they have to, they get that, that shock, that almost like this disenfranchisedness that people get when they're like, you're the professional. And I just say, yes, ma'am, like, no, that's not, I'm trying to avoid that by making sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And that's really wonderful and really important. Yeah. It's so critical. Like, no, you're a person, and I'm honoring your personhood. I'm not showing you that I'm above you and using words that you don't understand. And we're working on our treatment goals here, and you're still not using your coping skills.
But I think that also goes back to like ISPs 101. Like if you are creating an ISP with somebody, a treatment plan, regardless of diagnosis or whoever it is, it should be in words that the client understands. It should be in their words. So if you are a therapist and you're using these big words, because like Karen said, we want to show our vocabulary, then that's an issue that you have that you need to work on. But that's another therapy session for you, not while the client is there. And so I think people do get caught up in that power, like, oh, I'm supposed to be the professional, so I need to do this. But I know if you're working with a 6-year-old and you're using the words conundrum in your treatment plan, and this 6-year-old has never used that, I can tell you they probably didn't write that and you did. I think we just have, we do have to be mindful that we are doing it with the client and we're making sure it's something that they understand that they want. So it should be, what do you want to work on? And that should be in quotes. And, we can put the objective, somewhere measurable. So it's whatever, but yeah, we shouldn't be using that time to like express our skills as a writer when it's only should be about the client.
I love that. I love that. And their input into the treatment plan. Thank you. That is great. Exactly. It's about them, right? It's not about us.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's the perfect. No. Oh, okay. Let me read from Mary. We always say the client is the expert in their own lives. Yes. And putting in their quotes. Exactly. Exactly. I love that.
I love putting their quotes in my notes, in my treatment plan. I add the little quotation marks and put it exactly as is, because if that's what they want to work on, if they need a safe place to talk, done. My job's done. Make it easy.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. You guys are great. You've got this. You're already doing it. Just get other people to do it now.